I've seen some things in my time, things that would make a grown man cry, but nothing, and I mean nothing, compares to what I encountered that night in the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest. I'm a former Navy SEAL, and I've served my country for a good part of my life. Seen war, seen death, seen the worst of humanity, but this was different. I was on a mission, a private one. A friend of mine, a local, had been complaining about strange happenings around his property, livestock disappearing, strange noises at night, the works. I figured it was probably a bear or a cougar, but he insisted it was something else. He'd lived in these parts all his life, and he swore up and down that he'd never seen or heard anything like it. The first night I was there, I set up camp near the edge of his property, where most of the disturbances had been reported. It was a clear night, the stars shining bright above the towering pines. I'd always had a connection to this area, having spent many summers here as a kid. The forests, the mountains, they were a part of me. But that night they felt different, unsettling. I was about to turn in when I heard it. A strange clicking noise like two stones being tapped together. It was coming from the tree line just out of sight. I grabbed my flashlight and my sidearm and I moved toward the sound. And then I saw it. It was crouched low to the ground, moving on all fours. It was pale, so pale it almost glowed in the moonlight. Its body was gaunt, like it hadn't eaten in weeks. But its face was something out of a nightmare. Large black eyes that seemed to absorb the light, a gaping mouth that looked like a void, and no nose, just smooth, pale skin. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I'd faced down enemy combatants, stared death in the face, but this creature, it terrified me. It moved with a speed and agility that was unnatural, darting between the trees with a grace that belied its horrifying appearance. I backed away slowly, never taking my eyes off it. It watched me, its black eyes never leaving mine. I could hear the strange clicking noise again, louder now. It was coming from the creature. I retreated back to my camp, my mind racing. What was this thing? Where did it come from? And more importantly, what did it want? I spent the rest of the night awake, my eyes trained on the tree line. The creature didn't show itself again, but I could hear the clicking, a constant reminder of its presence. The next day, I started my investigation in earnest. I needed to know more about this creature, about what was happening in these woods. I had a feeling that this was just the beginning, that there was more to this story than I could see. And I was determined to find out what it was. Over the next few days, I started digging deeper. I talked to the locals, asked them if they'd seen or heard anything strange. Most of them brushed me off, said it was just the wildlife or the wind. But a few of them had stories. Stories of strange creatures in the woods, of livestock disappearing, of eerie noises in the night. One old man, a lifelong resident of the area, told me about the pale ones. According to him, they'd been around for as long as he could remember. They were creatures of the forest, he said, not meant to be seen by human eyes. He told me to leave them be, to let the forest have its secrets. But I couldn't do that. Not after what I'd seen. I spent my nights watching the tree line, waiting for the creature to show itself again. And every night, like clockwork, I'd hear the clicking. It was like it was taunting me, reminding me of its presence. But it never showed itself, never stepped out of the shadows. I started to question myself, started to wonder if I'd imagined the whole thing, but then I'd hear the clicking, and I'd remember those black eyes, that gaping mouth. I knew I hadn't imagined it. I knew it was real. One night, about a week after my first encounter, I decided to venture deeper into the forest. I needed to find it, needed to confront it. I packed my gear and set off, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The forest was eerily quiet. The only sound was the crunch of leaves under my boots. I moved slowly, my senses on high alert. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up, could feel the unease settling in my stomach. And then there it was, the clicking. It was louder now, closer. I turned my flashlight towards the sound, my heart pounding in my chest. and there in the beam of light I saw it. The creature. The pale one. It was watching me, its black eyes reflecting the light. It was on all fours, its body low to the ground. It was still for a moment, and then it moved. It was fast, faster than anything I'd ever seen. It darted between the trees, disappearing into the darkness. I stood there, frozen, as the silence of the forest closed in around me. The urge to follow was strong, but something held me back. A primal instinct, a warning from deep within. I knew then that I was not meant to follow, not meant to uncover the secrets of this creature. I turned back, retracing my steps through the forest. The clicking had stopped. The forest was silent once again. But the silence was different now. It was a respectful silence, a mutual understanding between me and the creature. I made it back to my camp just as the sun was rising. I packed up my gear, my mind racing. I had seen it, had seen the pale one. I had ventured into its territory, had heard its eerie clicking. I knew then that I couldn't stay, couldn't continue my investigation. I had seen too much, had gone too far. I left that morning, left the forest and the pale ones behind, but I can still hear the clicking, can still see those black eyes in my dreams. I know they're still out there, in the forests of the Pacific Northwest. I've been a park ranger at the Yosemite National Park for the past decade. It's been a good gig. Lots of the usual stuff, guiding tours, maintaining trails, dealing with lost hikers, you know, the typical ranger stuff. But lately, some things have been happening that are anything but typical. It all started with this one incident. I was on my usual patrol route when I got a call in the early evening about a disturbance near Half Dome. I was already in the area, so I responded. When I got there, I found a woman in her mid-30s, looking terrified and pointing at the sky. Now, Yosemite is a place of natural beauty. It's peaceful, it's well-maintained. But what she was pointing at was something I'd never seen before. She claimed she'd seen a UFO. At first, I thought she was just seeing things. Maybe she was dehydrated or had altitude sickness. But then I saw it too. A strange light in the sky, moving in ways that didn't make sense. But it gets weirder. As I was trying to calm her down and figure out what was going on, the light suddenly shot towards us. It was so fast it was just a blur, and then it was gone. I reported the incident, but it was dismissed as a possible drone or some kind of optical illusion. I didn't think much of it after that. A few weeks went by without any unusual incidents, and I thought maybe it was all over. But then it happened again, and again. Each time the light seemed to get closer and more intense. I don't mind telling you that it was starting to freak me out. The higher-ups started to worry about the safety of the hikers. Yosemite is a vast place with plenty of wilderness and remote areas. The park started increasing patrols in the area, but nothing seemed to deter the strange light. Then, almost exactly 2 weeks after the last sighting, another incident. This time the light didn't just appear and disappear. It stayed, hovering in the sky above the Half Dome. It was so bright it lit up the entire area. I couldn't make out what it was, but it was definitely not a drone or a plane. The light was so bright it was almost blinding. I had to shield my eyes with my hand just to look at it. It was pulsating, like a heartbeat, and it was making a low humming sound that I could feel in my chest. I radioed in the situation, but all I got was static. I tried again, but it was the same. It was like the light was interfering with the signal. I was alone with a strange light hovering above me. I won't lie, I was scared. I decided to head back to the ranger station, but as I turned to leave, the light moved. It shot across the sky, leaving a trail of light behind it, and then it was gone. Just like that. I stood there staring at the empty sky, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. But there was no logical explanation. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen or heard of before. The next day, I again reported the incident to my superiors. They were still skeptical, but they couldn't ignore the fact that something strange was happening in the park. They decided to bring in some experts to investigate. For the next few weeks, the park was swarming with scientists. They set up equipment and camped out, hoping to catch a glimpse of the strange light. But it never appeared. It was like it knew we were watching and decided to lay low. Just when we thought it was over, it happened again. This time it wasn't just a light. It was a full-blown UFO. It was hovering above Half Dome, just like before, but this time it was closer. It was so close I could make out details. It was round and metallic with lights all around it. It was silent except for that low hum that I could feel in my bones. As I stood there staring at the UFO, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. It was like I was meant to be there, like this was my destiny. I know it sounds crazy, but that's how I felt. Then, without warning, the UFO shot up into the sky and disappeared. It was so fast, it was just a blur of light, and then it was gone. Just like that. I stood there staring at the empty sky for what felt like an eternity. I was in awe, but also a little disappointed. I had so many questions, but I knew I would never get the answers. The next day, the park was buzzing with excitement. Everyone wanted to know what had happened, but I couldn't tell them. I couldn't put into words what I'd experienced. It was something you had to see to believe. In the weeks that followed, the sightings stopped. The scientists packed up their equipment and left, and the UFO enthusiasts moved on to the next hotspot. Life in the park went back to normal, but I was changed. I had seen something extraordinary, something otherworldly. I knew that we were not alone in the universe. And so I continue my work as a park ranger, guiding tours and maintaining trails. But every night I look up at the sky and I wonder if they'll come back, if I'll ever see that strange light again, and I really hope that I do. I'm a regular guy just like you. I work as a park ranger in the Appalachian Mountains. It's a peaceful job most of the time, but this past winter things got a bit weird. Very weird. So I'm out there in the mountains, right? It's the off-season, not many folks around. My buddy and I, Joe, are out there doing our usual cleanup. We're trying to get everything tidied up before a big snow that was about to hit. Now there's this creek that runs through the area. People love to hang out there, but they leave a mess. So, Joe and I are walking along the creek, picking up trash. Suddenly, Joe spots something. He's got a keen eye for animal tracks, and he's found some that don't belong. There are these hoof prints, big ones, leading up to the creek and then back into the woods. But here's the kicker, they're bipedal. Like whatever made these tracks was walking on two legs. Weird, right? So we decide to follow the tracks. They lead us into the forest, and it's clear this thing is heavy. The tracks are deep and they're headed southeast. We're about 20 minutes into our trek when we catch a whiff of something foul. Smells like rotten eggs. We keep going and the smell gets stronger. The tracks lead us to this old hollowed-out tree. The smell is unbearable now. Joe checks out the tree and pulls out this thing. It's like a skin, but it's covered in scales. It's big, too, like human-sized. We're both freaked out at this point. We radio the other rangers, tell them what we found, and hightail it out of there. When we get back, the other rangers are full of questions. We show them the skin, and they're just as baffled as we are. The head ranger tells us to steer clear of that area for a while. Fast forward a few weeks. We've all been away because of the snow. When we get back, the first thing we do is check out the area where we found the skin. Nothing. No tracks, no skin, no weird smells. But over the next few months, we keep finding these pieces of scaled skin. They're smaller than the first one, but they have that same rotten egg smell. And then last week, Joe found more of those bipedal hoof prints near a campsite. I don't know what's going on, but it's got me worried. Whatever this thing is, it's been keeping a low profile, but I'm not sure how long that'll last. A couple of weeks after Joe found those tracks, I was out on patrol. It was late, the sun was setting, and I was about to call it a day. I was walking along the creek, just enjoying the quiet, when I heard a rustling in the bushes. I turned around, and there it was. This creature standing on two legs just a few yards away from me. I froze, not sure what to do. It was big, bigger than any man I've ever seen. It had to be at least 7 feet tall. Its body was covered in scales, just like the skin we found. They were a dark green color, almost black. The scales were rough and jagged, like they could cut you if you touched them. It had a long, thick tail that swished back and forth slowly. Its legs were muscular and ended in hooves, just like the tracks we found. But its upper body, that's where things got really weird. It had arms long and muscular, with hands that ended in sharp claws. And its face, it was almost human, but not quite. It had a long snout with sharp teeth that glinted in the fading sunlight. Its eyes were a piercing yellow, and they were fixed on me. I stood there frozen in fear as it watched me. It didn't move, didn't make a sound. It just stood there watching me with those yellow eyes. I don't know how long we stood there staring at each other. It felt like hours, but it was probably only a few minutes. Then without warning, it turned and disappeared into the forest. I stood there for a moment trying to process what I had just seen. Then I turned and ran back to the ranger station. I told the other rangers what I saw, and they were just as shocked as I was. We decided to keep a closer eye on the area and to warn any visitors to be careful. I don't know what that creature is or where it came from, but I do know one thing. It's out there. That devil creature is out there in the Appalachian Mountains, and I have a feeling it's not going anywhere anytime soon. I attend college in Boston, and as you might know, the place is full of stories about the great American road trip. We got Route 66, cross-country tours, national parks, all of it. But you kind of get used to it, really. I never really took it seriously and felt that most of it's for show, for the tourists. I figured as a student, I was above all that. I knew what to believe and what not to. Not like the folks driving around in their RVs gawking at landmarks. That was before I turned 20, finished my sophomore year, and decided to take a summer road trip across the U.S. I work part-time at a library on campus, so I wanted to do something different, but I wasn't sure I'd be able to afford it. The road is long, but it has a certain charm, and if you work during the school year, it's much easier to afford a trip when you don't have to worry about classes. I figured it was worth a try, though, and I went online to plan. When I saw the cost of this used van on Craigslist, I thought maybe it was a typo because it was so low. I figured I had nothing to lose, so I called. The seller seemed weirdly happy that I'd called, so I thought the van must be a total clunker. I agreed to meet him at his place the next day, though. He also seemed insistent that we do it before it got dark. He kept reminding me not to be late. So after work the next day, I drove over there. The van was parked in a lot full of used cars and trucks. The van was a classic Volkswagen. I don't want to say the color, but it's kind of a hippie symbol. The type of vehicle that screams road trip and has bumper stickers from all over the country. You had to climb in through the side door to get into it. Once you were in there, though, it was cozy. Comfortable seats, wooden interior, just enough space for one person to sleep. An older stove in the back, but that was fine. I didn't cook much. The back window looked out onto a nice view of wherever you parked. I liked it and gave him a verbal commitment, but the seller couldn't take my cash quick enough. I wondered if he had a gambling problem or something, because he seemed to need that money pretty bad. I drove off a few days later and everything was fine. It's an old van like a lot of them on the road, so the engine kind of groaned, and I couldn't use too many appliances at once or the fuse would trip, but that was okay. That first night, though, I had a weird urge to buy a camera. I don't take photos, but that Polaroid at the corner store called my name. I didn't want to because that stuff's not cheap, but I also wanted to. Had to, really. When I got back, I was going to put it in the cabinet, but something told me to put it on the dashboard. Something like almost a voice. Almost, but not enough to scare me. Not yet. Over the next few days, I started noticing an extra photo in the morning. I don't always remember taking pictures, and a lot of times I meet people on the road or just stop at a scenic spot. So I wasn't really sure. Did we take 4 photos last night or 3? After a week, I decided I'd make sure the camera was empty before I went to bed, just to see. Sure enough, in the morning, there was a photo on the dashboard. I'd forgotten about the Polaroid. I finally put the two together and checked the film. It was half empty. I started to freak out. Who was taking photos at night? Why? I made sure all the doors and windows were locked, but it still happened. Someone must have a key, I figured. I listened but didn't hear anything. Yet the photos kept appearing, and the film level got lower. I finally set up a camera pointed at the dashboard. It would have to pick up whoever was doing this. By this point, I was terrified, and my hands were shaking the next morning when I checked the footage. It showed nothing, but the photo was still there. I watched it over and over, but I didn't see anything. Finally, I turned the volume up as high as it could go, and I heard something like a voice on the video, but I couldn't understand what it was saying. I thought about calling the police, but I didn't want anyone thinking I was crazy. I decided to go to the local diner instead. Waitresses have heard it all, right? I ordered a coffee and asked the waitress what she knew about the van. She said she's only been working at the diner for a year, so she doesn't know the whole story, but she heard a guy was found dead in a similar van after a road trip. Since then, no one has bought the van for more than a couple of months, she said. Most people just sell it, leave the memories, and move on. I asked her what she could tell me about the guy, and she said supposedly he used to travel a lot. Photography? I asked. She said, "Yeah, how'd you know?" I've been following your show for a while now, and I figured it's about time I shared an experience of my own. I can hardly believe it myself. It happened in my first year on the job as a park ranger in the depths of the Everglades. One night on my usual patrol, I saw something bizarre. I was on my usual patrol, walking around with my flashlight, checking on the wildlife and ensuring campers were settled. Suddenly, I noticed something near the water's edge. At first, I figured it was just another gator. We see plenty of them in the park. But as I moved closer, I realized this was something entirely different. It was a figure, around 7 feet tall, hunched over like it was examining something on the ground. The creature was covered in scales, kind of a greenish color that shimmered slightly in the beam of my flashlight. It had long arms, longer than any humans, ending in what looked like claws. The sight was disturbingly abnormal. Its head was strange, too, like a cross between an alligator's and a human's, round but with those reptilian features. I called out, maybe in a vein, hoping that it was a prankster in a costume, but the reaction I got gave me chills. The creature turned to face me, and its eyes, they were just wrong. They glowed in the flashlight, bright yellow with slits for pupils, just like a reptile. I was rooted to the spot, my mind racing to make sense of what I was seeing. Before I could gather my wits, the creature slipped silently into the water, leaving me standing there in the silent fog. The next day, when I shared my story with the other rangers, they laughed it off, suggesting it was the product of a long night and an overactive imagination. But I couldn't just forget what I'd seen. So I began digging through the park's old records and found similar sightings dating back decades, descriptions of the same reptilian humanoid, the same eerie eyes, the same silent disappearance. This left me with a strange cocktail of emotions. I was relieved to find I wasn't alone in my sighting, but it was unnerving to think there might be some truth in what I saw. Ever since, on my patrols, even though I've never encountered the creature again, I often feel watched. The feeling is strongest by the water's edge, where I first saw it. It's a prickling sensation, the sense of unseen eyes tracking my movement. So strange. Anyway, that's my story. I know it might sound far-fetched, but I promise you, I couldn't make this up even if I tried. I would like to add one more thing about this creature's power. I've seen countless gators in my time here. I've seen them hunt, fight, and assert their dominance over the waterways. But this creature, it was different. The sheer size of it was one thing. It towered at about 7 feet tall, significantly bigger than even the largest gators we get in these parts. And its arms, they were thick and muscular, like it could snap a tree branch in half without breaking a sweat. There was a grace to its movements, too, an eerie fluidity that seemed both alien and yet eerily familiar. While a gator possesses a primal, raw strength, this creature seemed to radiate a calculated power. It moved with purpose and intelligence. The way it slipped into the water, barely causing a ripple despite its size, it suggested a creature perfectly adapted to its environment and possibly at the top of the food chain. No gator, no matter how large or ferocious, has ever given me the chills the way this creature did. Its presence seemed to silence the marsh around us, and even after it disappeared, it took a while for the sounds of the swamp to return. You know, before I settled into this quiet life, I was an FBI agent, stationed at a facility so remote it felt like the edge of the world. We conducted experiments there, the kind that would make your blood run cold. One experiment in particular has stayed with me. It involved a creature, a beast that looked like a nightmarish blend of man and wolf. It was enormous, muscles bulging under its thick fur, and it had these eyes, these haunting yellow eyes that seemed to glow with an inner fire. I only ever saw it from a distance, but even from afar its raw power was palpable. It was like standing next to a roaring furnace, you know? You could feel the heat, the danger just radiating off it. They released it into this fenced-off area, a sort of nature reserve, filled with all sorts of wildlife. I don't know why they did it, but this creature was designed to kill. And it did. I won't go into the grisly details, but it was a sight that still haunts my dreams. I've seen some strange things in my time at that facility, things that would make a hardened man shiver. But that creature, it was something else. It was like it was from another world. And the way it moved, the way it hunted, it was like watching a force of nature. After witnessing that creature, my days at the facility were never the same. Every creak, every shadow, every unexpected sound, it all made me think of the beast. I couldn't shake the image of its muscular form, its yellow eyes, the way it moved with such deadly grace. I tried to find out more about it, but it was like hitting a brick wall. No one would talk. No one would even acknowledge that the creature existed. It was like we were all part of some unspoken pact to pretend it was just a figment of our imaginations. But I knew what I saw. I knew that creature was real. And I knew it was still out there in that fenced-off area, doing what it was designed to do. The thought of it kept me up at night, kept me on edge during the day. I started to notice other strange things at the facility too. Unexplained occurrences, things that didn't add up. Like how some of the wildlife in the fenced-off area would just disappear without a trace. Or how sometimes late at night I'd hear these low, guttural sounds echoing through the halls. I asked questions, tried to get answers, but it was always the same response: silence, evasion, denial. It was like everyone was too afraid to talk and too afraid to admit what was really going on. I guess I'm the brave one, and it feels good to finally tell my story. Park rangers are experiencing bizarre, unexplainable phenomena. Some deem it as supernatural, while others see it as just completely unexplainable. The story I'm going to share highlights just some of the mystery. This story was submitted to me by a gentleman who referred to himself as Jason. Jason went on to tell me in his email that all this occurred between 2005 and 2009 in a national park. He wished and requested to remain anonymous, but informed me that it's okay to tell you that it is in the northern section of the United States. What's interesting about Jason's story is that he brings forth information about a search and rescue mission. They found a body posed about 40 feet up in a pine tree with wounds that were physically impossible for a bear to make. However, it was written down as a bear kill. After all, bears attacking and killing humans isn't necessarily new. But to write off these bizarre events as a simple bear kill is just not adding up. Jason explained that for a while now, months before this even happened, he and his colleagues were hearing and experiencing strange things all around the park. They witnessed mysterious phenomena, mysterious black apparitions appearing out of the corner of their eyes, and strange lights and sounds appearing all over the park at all times of the day. But they mostly didn't talk about it, or very infrequently it would come up in casual conversation. However, it's not something you're going to outright report to your superiors, and for good reason. For a while now, visitors across the park had been complaining about strange, disturbing noises. From humans screaming and yelling to strange, unexplainable animal sounds, all coming from the backcountry area of the forest in the park. But when investigated by rangers and staff at the park, there was no trace of anything, no track and no evidence of anybody being back there. It's as if these sounds simply manifested on their own and vanished when anybody would show curiosity to inspect what was happening. Apparently, some of Jason's closest colleagues and people he worked with had some strange experiences while in this small section of the backwoods. Although they refused to talk about it, every time it was brought up casually, they seemed to go pale and act scared, as if they knew something but were too afraid to talk about it. Now, this puzzled Jason. Keep in mind that these particular events I'm explaining now happened before the search and rescue, where the body was found posed up in a tree and assumed to be, or at least written down as, a bear kill. Other reports had come in that Jason dealt with personally. In these backcountry campsites, food and supplies were being taken. But it was easily written off because animals can steal food and supplies, and the human noises or sounds could easily be written off and explained as foxes and mountain lions at nighttime. Then Jason goes on to tell of a more harrowing experience. This was, of course, after the search and rescue find of the body. Some personnel were growing concerned because they believed they had a bear accustomed to human food on their hands, and it would only prove to be dangerous. However, upon venturing back further, they found what appeared to be a den of some kind, not that of a bear. One of Jason's closest colleagues also reported strange sounds like a mechanical humming in the woods right near where this den was. It was around this same den where he spotted strange tracks that he could not quite identify. In fact, they looked more like a goat track, but did not resemble any animal that he is familiar with. For the following few days, they would spend time hiking throughout this small valley where a bizarre, pervasive odor of death crept up on them. In this same evening, while they were at their campsite, they experienced a series of strange events that would occur over the course of the night. One of them reported strange whispers and hushed tones right near the tent, along with some strange gurgling noises like somebody gargling on blood. As Jason recalls, one of these park rangers ventured out beyond the reaches of his tent and the safety of the flashlight, armed with a rifle to investigate the source of these strange noises. There was some moonlight giving brief illumination to the area around him, but even though he could see off into the woodlands and was shining and scanning with his flashlight, he didn't capture anything. But there were a few moments where he swore that he could see a very tall, skinny silhouette watching him from the tree line, a silhouette that unmistakably was not a bear in any way, shape, or form. What's also strange is the ever-pervading odor of death in this whole valley. The rangers who had made note of it noticed that any time the strange occurrences happened, whether it be sights or smells or phenomena, this odor of death would increase tenfold. They explained it to Jason, who related to me as this: imagine standing next to a cow carcass that had been dead for 3 to 4 days, baking in the hot sun. That would be enough to make you gag. But there was no visible source for this odor to be coming from, especially not as strong and as potent as this smell was. The following day, they all returned to the main portion of the camp with no signs or evidence to further validate what the source of the noises were. This only complicated things more as everybody was so perplexed at their findings. While everybody was creeped out, nobody was about to go ahead and point fingers and call it a boogeyman. If you want to keep your credibility, that's not something you even hint at in a professional setting. What's also very interesting is that the same day in October, 2 hikers would end up missing around the same area where they heard those noises the previous night in that same valley. Jason, who was now involved in a search party to find these 2 missing hikers, experienced a series of unexplainable events, sounds, and phenomena. These events further validated the experiences of his 2 fellow colleagues just days before. While the two missing hikers were never found and are still considered several of the missing persons cases today, the experiences that Jason recalls were completely bone-chilling. Once he had discovered these human remains high in the tree, he didn't really tell me via email all the details, but he followed the appropriate protocol to have the body properly taken care of. But they could not identify who the body belonged to, and there had been no reports in the general time frame of anybody gone missing. So the hiker was simply a Jane Doe. The problem was not so much the body and the missing person who it belonged to, it was more so the condition in which the body was found. Jason shared with me some pretty disturbing descriptions of how the body was found, and I'm not going to share every little detail. But I will say that the body was badly mangled in a way that did not classify as a wolf, or a bear, or a mountain lion kill. The body was hardly eaten on, but primarily just disfigured, as if something had used this person as its plaything and mangled this corpse. There were even bizarre bite marks taken out of it that did not fit a canine of any kind, or a bear or a mountain lion, coyote, fox, or anything falling under the carnivorous or omnivore category. Nothing matched up, not even the teeth marks. Nobody could really figure it out. So this was yet another case written down as simply a bear kill. Even Jason, who had found the body originally, tried his best to rationalize the find as somebody having a very unfortunate run-in with a bear. But with how badly mangled this person was, which bears do not do, it did not line up with the way a bear kills. I'll let you guys be the judge on this and let you guys speculate. Could this have been something supernatural? Does this have any connection at all to the thing chasing Jason at night, or the experience the other two park rangers had in the valley? Or is this simply just a misidentification of an unfortunate individual being slaughtered by a bear? Those are just about all the details Jason left me, so I'd love to hear what you guys think in the comments below for this particular story. What do you think happened? Is it real? Was there something truly supernatural? Or is there simply a way to rationally explain it all with critical thinking and real-life evidence? You know, people tend to romanticize the life of a park ranger. They envision us basking in the glory of nature, surrounded by picturesque vistas and charming wildlife. Well, let me set the record straight. Sure, there are days of tranquility and peace, but it's not all postcard-perfect scenes. The job comes with its fair share of eerie shadows and spine-tingling mysteries, especially if you're like me, with a curiosity that tends to bite back. A few years back, during my tenure as a ranger, I began to notice something peculiar within our park. Nestled away from the beaten paths and the well-trodden trails, about 2 miles deep into the forest, was an ancient-looking building. It was a decrepit structure, hidden under a blanket of thick overgrowth, surrounded by a rusty barbed wire fence. The building was conspicuously absent from any of our official maps, and trust me, I checked them all. This enigma was a splinter in my mind, nagging me with its existence. Eager for answers, I brought up the topic with my fellow rangers. I expected them to share my curiosity, my concern, but all I received were dismissive shrugs. Their casual responses echoed the same sentiment. Don't trouble yourself over it, they'd advise. Leave it alone. But their indifference clashed with my nature. I've always been the kind of guy who dives headfirst into mysteries, relishing the thrill of the unknown, and this cryptic building was a riddle I couldn't ignore. My intrigue escalated to an all-time high one moonless night. While I was on patrol, following the same route I'd taken 100 times before, something unusual caught my eye. A behemoth of a tractor-trailer, pitch black and intimidating, rolled up to the mysterious building. 4 figures, their features hidden under heavy, dark clothing, exited the vehicle. They busied themselves unloading an unknown cargo into the back of the building. The sight was as intriguing as it was suspicious, but the distance and darkness made it impossible to discern what they were transporting. My curiosity was stirred into a frenzied whirlpool, the mystery deepening with each passing moment. The next morning, I attempted to broach the subject with the senior ranger, hoping that he, with his years of experience, would shed some light on the matter. Yet, much to my dismay, he brushed off my concerns, chalking it up to an overactive imagination. His words were a proverbial slap to my face, a cold dismissal of my instincts. But that didn't discourage me. If anything, it steeled my resolve. I wanted answers, and I was hell-bent on finding them. Weeks turned into months, and my vigilance over that forsaken building didn't waver. More suspicious activities, more covert meetings under the cloak of night. The more I tried to unearth the truth, the more hostility I faced from my superiors. It reached a boiling point when they presented me with an ultimatum: abandon my investigation or face severe consequences. You see, I'm not the kind of man who can be bullied into submission. My curiosity, my innate desire for justice, they were forces I couldn't ignore. But my tenacity came at a steep price. I was fired, stripped of my ranger's badge, my years of faithful service disregarded without a second thought. If given the chance, though, I wouldn't change a thing. There are things in this world that outweigh the security of a job, and to me, uncovering the truth behind that isolated building was one of them. Today, I'm no longer a park ranger. The uniform is gone, but the spirit remains. This mystery is far from solved. It's not over, not by a long shot. I may not know what's happening in that forsaken building, but I'll unearth its secrets. I owe it to myself and to the park I once dedicated my life to safeguard. So, here's to hoping luck is on my side. And if you don't hear from me again, well, just know that I've stumbled onto something I was never meant to discover. Hey there, my name's Jack. A buddy of mine suggested I share my story with you. I've been hesitant to talk about it, but I guess it's time to put it all out there. So this all kicked off during my trip to Canada. I was visiting my old college friend Mike, who had settled down in Vancouver. We decided to take a trip to the Canadian Rockies, a place I'd always wanted to see. We had planned a whole week of hiking, fishing, and just soaking in the natural beauty. One evening after a long day of hiking, we returned to our cabin and realized we really wished we'd had some cold beers to drink by the fire. I volunteered to drive to the little shop down the road and fetch some. It was pretty dark, and I was navigating with my high beams on. As I was driving, I noticed a strange light in the distance over the mountains, but it was hard to make out with my lights being so bright. It sort of looked like a searchlight, but there was no sound of a helicopter or anything. I found it odd, but I continued towards the store. Then within the next few minutes, I saw it alongside the road up ahead. I saw this figure. At first I thought it was a man, but something about it was off. It was too tall, too thin, and its head was disproportionately large. Its body was frail, and its eyes were an intense black. Despite the alarm bells ringing in my head, I felt an inexplicable pull towards it. As I approached the figure, my heart began to race, and a sense of unease washed over me. The creature stood motionless, its elongated limbs dangling loosely by its sides. Its skin, if it could even be called that, appeared translucent, revealing a network of pulsating veins that glowed with an otherworldly blue hue. The creature's head turned slowly, as if it was studying me with those piercing black eyes. It was unnerving, as if it could see right through me, into the deepest recesses of my soul. A shiver ran down my spine, and I fought the urge to slam on the brakes and speed away from this bizarre encounter. But my curiosity outweighed my fear, and I cautiously rolled down the window to get a better look. As soon as the window opened, a gust of cold wind rushed into the car, carrying with it an acrid scent that made my nose scrunch in discomfort. The creature's head tilted to the side, almost as if it was mimicking human curiosity. It emitted a low, guttural sound that sent a chill down my spine. The strange light I had seen earlier continued to hover above the mountains, casting an eerie glow over the surrounding landscape. The air crackled with an inexplicable energy, and I felt a tingling sensation spreading through my body. Without warning, the creature extended one of its bony fingers towards me. Its touch was icy and sent a jolt of electricity through my veins. I could barely breathe as an overwhelming sense of dread consumed me. In that moment, I realized that this encounter was far from ordinary. It wasn't just some chance encounter with a strange being. It felt like an encounter with something beyond our comprehension, something extraterrestrial. As the seconds stretched into an eternity, I mustered the courage to break free from the creature's gaze. I slammed my foot on the gas pedal, my heart pounding in my chest. The tires screeched as I accelerated away from the creature and the inexplicable phenomenon that surrounded it. Breathing heavily, I stole a quick glance in the rearview mirror. The creature stood there, its dark eyes still fixed on me, but it made no attempt to follow. It remained an enigmatic presence in the darkness, a haunting memory etched into my mind. I finally reached the store, bought the beer, and raced back to the cabin. I stumbled out of the car, my legs weak with both relief and lingering fear. I relayed the encounter to Mike, who listened intently, his eyes wide with disbelief. We spent the rest of the night discussing theories and possibilities, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Years have passed since that fateful night in the Canadian Rockies, but the memory of that encounter still lingers within me. It serves as a reminder that there are mysteries in this vast universe, that we may never fully understand, that there are creatures and phenomena beyond the realm of human comprehension. Perhaps one day the truth will reveal itself, and the enigma of that creature and the strange light in the mountains will be unraveled. But until then, it remains an unforgettable chapter in my life, a story that I share with others as a cautionary tale of the unknown lurking just beyond the edges of our perception. I didn't close my coffee shop because the business was failing. I didn't close it because my customers left or because the bakery section got a bad reputation. Nothing like that happened. I was successful. Honestly, I was happy and successful, a combination that I thought was impossible for a very long time. You've got a shop like mine in your town, I bet. You know, the local coffee place the college kids go to. They all swear it's better than the big brand's coffee, even though the truth is, they just like the quiet atmosphere. Every town's got one. Except for ours, I guess. You see, my shop stopped being about coffee. If I was within 3 blocks of that building, all I could think about was the thing I saw out back, the thing in the dumpster, the thing that started as a man but quickly became something else. I closed up alone most nights. The shop would shut down for 4 hours before the baker came in to prep that morning's menu. I'd come back around dawn and business would start soon thereafter. This particular night, I'd gathered up the trash and was headed out back to the dumpster. It was my last task before locking up. When I saw the black lid was thrown back, I suspected the worst. Well, it had been the worst up until that point. The local homeless would sometimes rummage through our trash, searching for anything of value. I didn't blame them necessarily, but we didn't throw out much food and we didn't throw out recyclables, so their searching was more often a nuisance than it was rewarding. Regardless of whether or not I offered them a cup of coffee, they never took the eviction well. When I heard something rummaging inside of the industrial-sized green metal frame, I prepared myself for that conversation. "Hey!" I called out. "There's better stuff inside!" Instead of responding, whoever was ducking inside the dumpster went quiet. They went still, as if I wouldn't eventually see them as I approached the structure. The closer I got, the more I realized how bad they were at hiding. I could still hear them breathing, heavy and labored. It sounded like something was obstructing their airway. Maybe they were sick, I didn't know. The low rumble of their breath did make me slow down, though. When I was finally close enough to see over the lip of the dumpster, I was more nervous than anything. I did my part to help the people in my community, but I wasn't eager to get sick myself. Right before I looked over the edge, the stranger reached out. A human-like hand, 4 fingers and 1 thumb, curled over the lip of the dumpster. The nails were long and dark, even in the poor nighttime light. Hair curled on the man's wrist and ran down to his knuckles. Although the fingers were bare, they looked swollen and inflamed. The coloration on his nails made me guess that they were infected somehow. I backed up. I stopped talking. Suddenly, the garbage in my hands wasn't terribly important. The next to rise over the edge of that dumpster wasn't the disease-ridden face I was expecting. I watched as the head of a dog climbed into sight. It didn't make sense, but that's what it was. A dog's head at the top of this thing's hairy shoulders. Its maw was long. Yellow teeth peeked out from between its curled lips. Its ears were tall like a wolf's or a fox's, and they were both pinned back against its head. I couldn't understand what it was. I still can't wrap my head around it, not really. I just know in that moment, I was the smallest thing on the face of the planet, and I was standing in the path of a giant. It climbed one leg after another out of the dumpster and hopped to the ground. It tripped, fell onto its side with a nearly comical display of clumsiness. It was thin, starving probably. That explained the look in its eyes too. But I couldn't expect it to be weak or slow, even with starvation holding it back. It was taller than me by nearly 2 feet. I could imagine how long its stride was and how quickly it could move. It dropped onto all fours instead of standing upright. I couldn't outrun something like that, but I didn't want to stand there and face it either. I dropped the trash, splitting open one of the bags, and turned to flee back into the building. I heard the creature leap forward. I grit my teeth, expecting its fangs to sink into my back. That didn't happen. I reached the door safely, ducked inside, and locked it shut. Looking out the window, I could still see it. It was sniffing through the trash bag, chewing on a discarded paper cup. I was wrong, I realized. Starvation had saved me. Chewing its way through the trash was a lot easier than coming after me. I called both the police and animal control. Only animal control agreed to investigate the scene. By the time I could hear their tires rolling down the street, the monster was gone. Its ears had perked up long before mine. It glanced briefly at the window I was staring through, and then it disappeared. It ran off, disappearing somewhere in town. They told me it was a bear or a dog that I'd seen. I wasn't in any state to argue with them, but I know that wasn't some ordinary animal, and I couldn't get it out of my mind after that. So the coffee shop had to go. I don't tell this story often either. It isn't something I enjoy sharing, but please, if you hear something unseen rummaging through your trash, maybe investigate those sounds with more than garbage in your hands. I'm a hobbyist and a paranormal investigator. I wanted to take some time and share with you an encounter story that I've recently come to know from a man in the state of Alabama. This man had an encounter near his home. He claims it was a reptilian that he said was about 10 feet tall, and it left 3 claw marks on the hood of his truck in a fierce showdown. It apparently tried to kill the man but was unsuccessful. He, however, was successful in getting away. What made this the scariest of all is that there were other witnesses to this strange event. The descriptions given by the 2 who saw the same thing as the man were the same. The 2 witnesses were his wife and older son. They were all terrified by what he saw that afternoon. He claimed that this thing climbed right out of the swamps and went right for him. They kind of had a brawl, and he shot at this thing multiple times, trying to get it to go away. The man deeply admitted to being terrified of what he saw, and if this thing wanted to kill him, it could have easily done so. This reptilian cryptid, as described by the witnesses, was around 10 feet tall, grayish to green scaly skin, sharp teeth in its mouth, large hands with 3 claws each, and long protruding spikes all over its back, with a long tail covered in barbs or thorns. Its eyes were red with yellow-like slits for pupils. It looked extremely angry. The thing was supposedly able to climb trees and also walked around on 2 legs like a man would, very comfortably. The witness says that the thing had a horrible, sickening smell that emitted from it. You could smell it before it even showed up. It smelled bad. The mom and son just kept saying how horrible the smell was, and they are praying to never have another encounter with whatever this was. The witness was so terrified after the incident that he and his family moved away from the area. The family now lives in northern Florida with their relatives in order to avoid that property and area altogether. When I spoke to the witness, he claimed there are a lot of swamplands that surrounded that specific county. Also, lots of deer, lots of hunting. He said the surrounding county is very rural, and a lot of people like to hunt there. He now prefers living in northern Florida. He doesn't want another reptilian encounter experience. He doesn't want to be that close to those swamps ever again, especially after his family had their very first and hopefully only encounter. The man also wants to be clear that what he saw was not a human in a suit, but something else. Something dark, something from another world. When they were definitely being attacked, he also admits that he got a look at the creature. The man said that his wife described it exactly the way he did. It was hideous. She was hiding inside, afraid of what might happen if she stepped outside and was unsure of what to do. She said she also smelled a foul odor before she ever saw the creature. And even when she saw it, and after it disappeared, her description of its claws was identical to her husband's description. She described them as 3 claws that resembled retractable knives coming out of each hand. It was also reported to have been making a loud shrieking noise as it approached. She said her husband is lucky that this thing let him get away. If anyone else has had a sighting or an encounter story that you know regarding something like this, I'd appreciate any information you could share with me. Because here there is something very strange going on, and because we don't have photographic evidence, at least not yet, we won't be able to prove this thing exists, which we're wanting to do. Skinwalkers are shapeshifters. They can turn into any animal they want to, which is why it's so hard to believe in them. The main idea of this creature is to be feared for what they may or may not do. Little is known about these creatures, but many stories are told around the southwest states here in the United States. One particular incident was told to me by my own great-grandmother. It was an experience she had when she was 11 or 12 in the early 1930s. She said that it was during the Great Depression, which, as you would imagine, was a very depressing time. She was helping her father on the farm, lifting bales of hay and feeding the cattle. She said her feet had blisters and her hands had sores from all the physical labor, if only kids today knew. She told me it was around 4 in the evening, summertime, and her father was already back inside getting ready for dinner and she was still outside. She was pretty irritated that all her brothers had gone back in. That's when something strange happened. The sun began to get really small in the sky and it grew bigger and eventually disappeared behind the clouds. This left the sky very gray, and she began to fear for herself. The next thing, one of the cattle beside her began going crazy, running around and roaring, greatly agitated. It scared the heck out of her. She had no experience calming animals. The next thing she said, the cow ran behind some bushes, then emerged as a sheep, but covered in blood and with the face of a wolf. My great-grandmother told me she stood there, absolutely petrified, watching this sheep emerge, but not a sheep, something else, something dark and demonic. I remember she broke down as she explained her story even all these years later. My great-grandmother, now nearing 90, reliving such a trauma from many years before, it was deeply moving. It showed me that trauma and pain never leave our memory. She explained that the sheep continued running around the field, scaring the cattle, maiming several of them. It looked totally crazed and bloodthirsty. The next thing she told me was that her own father came out with the family shotgun and attempted to shoot the sheep, but it disappeared behind the bushes, never coming out. When they checked the bushes, nothing was there except some dried blood and wool. My great-grandmother said her father moved the entire family after the incident and regularly used blessed salt and holy water all over the farm. My great-grandmother was very into supernatural and paranormal events. She did a great deal of research on the incident and is convinced she saw a shapeshifter. I mean, it would make a lot of sense, as many of the characteristics of shapeshifters are fulfilled in my great-grandmother's description. This story has fascinated me from childhood to the age of 35 today. I feel compelled to put pen to paper and share this recollection of my great-grandmother's tale with as many people as possible. I feel I owe it to her. No child deserved to see such horror. That is what my great-grandmother saw. So, if you are reading this, please tell me something about them. Have they always existed? How do we get rid of them? What do they do? What are they capable of? Are they all evil? I mean, are there good shapeshifters? I have so many questions, but I am committed to researching this, and I hope you can provide me with many answers. If not for me, then for my great-grandmother. I never told anyone why I quit my job. All I know is I'll never forget the smell, like ash and death, and the feeling of being watched. Always watched, no matter what I did or where I went. It was wildfire season in California, and there was a burn doing its thing not far away from the state park I worked, Castle Crags. Maybe you've heard of it. Well, if you're in NorCal, you might have. Honestly, it's gorgeous there. Not enough to make me go back, but gorgeous. Anyway, it was fire season, which meant that even if nothing around me was burning, everything still smelled like it was burning. Ash was everywhere in this fine gray fall, like God dumped powder on everything. We all wore masks when we were on duty, but there's nothing a mask can do about the smell of fire and burning pine. Felt like I was licking the bottom of an ashtray when I came in from patrol. It wasn't like we had a lot of people in the park at the time. It was that we were patrolling for signs of fire, or worse, vandals who might want to cause more fires. I don't know what it is about fire that brings out copycat arsonists, but it was something we had to worry about. I swear, people are worse than the bears sometimes. Those were a worry too. Animals coming down from other areas to get away from the fires. And like I said, nothing where we were was actually burning, and we were working hard to keep it that way. Didn't mean that some bear or mountain lion wasn't going to set up shop in our park and create problems once the tourists started coming back. Nothing says snack to a wild animal like tents appearing in the wilderness. Sorry I sound bitter. I'm surprised I still am. But maybe it's because being bitter is better than being afraid. I don't want to be afraid. Doesn't mean I'm not. Not every time I smell wood smoke. There's that primal fear, it just hits you. And after listening to your channel for a while, I think I know why. Like I said, fire season. Still had to work. So I did. I went out, made sure there was nothing happening on my assigned trails. It was quiet. The weird kind of charged quiet that happens when something bad is happening, but it's not right in front of you. I had the patrol that went along the main trail to Lower Loop Campground, and yeah, I saw a couple of kids out there. I swear. Stupid games, stupid prizes. They had a couple of heavy backpacks on, which gave me a good reason to detain them. I checked their packs, found flares and lighter fluid, and that was more than enough. I radioed the station once I had them cuffed for someone to come out with a jeep and haul them in. That meant a nice wait out in the great outdoors, with the air quality going absolutely south and my eyes stinging from the particles in the air. And of course, it had to get worse. I still remember how the radio crackled and I heard the report of Ranger missed the check-in. I felt cold. I can't even say I was surprised since visibility was garbage, and if I didn't know my trail as well as I did, it would have been easy to get lost. If he was lost, easy to fall and get hurt too. The ranger who got lost, I'll call him Jim, because if he ever finds out I outed him on YouTube, he'll be mad, was checking out the Pacific Coast Trail campsite loop, which was directly to the north of my position. We were friends. I radioed in that I'd go look for him. Once the station sent over a jeep, and we packed the teenage wannabe arsonists into it, we headed for PCT. That campsite was closer to where the fires were, and while the trail was passable, the air was just thick. It felt like I could chew it. It didn't make a bit of difference that we had masks on. The haze was getting worse and worse. It was practically orange and thick with ash particles. There was no way we should be out there. We needed to get to the station, to an oxygen tank, as fast as we could. But not without Jim. Not when I thought we were probably the closest ranger unit available. In this atmosphere, waiting to find him could mean not finding him at all. I told the other ranger to drop me at the head of the trail and get the kids back to the station, drop them off, then come back for me and Jim. I hopped out of the Jeep and headed right up the trail. It felt like I was walking into hell. It was eerily quiet. The air felt thick, like I was walking into static electricity, and everything felt, I don't know, maybe the word is ominous. The fires must have been getting closer because it felt hotter than it had down to the south. I still didn't see actual flames, but it almost didn't matter. I called out for Jim, but even with the mask covering my face and filtering the ash, it was getting into my mouth. I started coughing. The way I was going, I thought he'd be able to find me if he could just hear me hacking up a lung. But I didn't get any answer. Was Jim unconscious somewhere? Had the lack of clean air gotten him? Or had he tripped in this awful haze and fallen somewhere along the trail? If he had, I was sure I wouldn't find him. I just kept thinking he would have come for me and kept going. Maybe it wasn't the smartest thing I could do, but it felt like the only thing I could do. I'd gotten partway up the trail to PCT campsite when I felt weird. At first, I thought it was dehydration, but even though I stopped to grab some water from my flask, I still felt it. God, please don't let it be a disoriented mountain lion, I prayed. You feel like that when one's stalking you, you know. Mountain lions are ambush predators, and I didn't have a dog with me. I didn't want to run into one. I kept going up the trail faster, but checking behind me every few seconds. That really slowed me down. I never saw anything, but I felt eyes on me anyway. Gave me the creeps. Well, more of the creeps. And it was quiet. I couldn't hear anything, not even the wind. Just my own breathing, and my own boots crunching on the dirt. I called out for Jim, for anybody, but that watched feeling didn't go away. Probably not a mountain lion then. That didn't make me feel any better. I concentrated on looking for Jim. Probably didn't help that our ranger uniforms didn't exactly stand out, especially in this smoke. I stopped when I got to the head of the trail just before the loop. Would Jim have gone up there? The air was getting worse by the minute. For a second I thought I heard something. Flames? Jim? I spun around and saw red, but not just any red. Lurid red, thick ruby red, shining in the sooty air like flames. I swear I felt my heart drop into my boots. There was no way I'd live through a burnout here. I didn't have a Nomex shelter. I didn't have anything but standard hiking gear. I sucked in a breath and tasted ashes and sweat. You'll think I'm crazy, but the flames, the red things, they didn't move. They didn't expand or get closer. I couldn't hear the crackle of fire, so I figured maybe they weren't flames at all. But what were they? Jim. I had to find Jim and get out of here. And if I had to go through whatever that was, I'd do it. I took another couple of steps up the PCT, and that was when things got really weird. I can't really believe I said that, but they did. Because those red things, they moved a lot. There was this whooshing sound and the feeling of hot air hitting me, and suddenly the red things were in front of me, not behind me. And they were about 8 feet away. And they were eyes. I wouldn't have been surprised to see deer, bobcat, or maybe even a bear chased west by the fires. This wasn't any of those things. I don't know what it was, and honestly, I figured the lack of oxygen had finally gotten to me. This thing, I don't know what else to call it, but a thing was big, tall, furry, big red eyes like dinner plates. I screamed. The thing staggered back. I guess it was as scared as I was, but I really wasn't thinking about that. All I was thinking was I had no idea what it was or where Jim was or what to do about either of those things. I was sure I was gonna die, choking on smoke and ash, out in the middle of a state park that didn't seem nearly as beautiful as it had been before. And then I heard it. The beautiful, beautiful sound of a Jeep motor coming up the track. The creature suddenly sprouted wings, freaking wings, and launched itself up and away. It landed about 20 feet away and stared at me again like it was trying to communicate. Well, I'm no mind reader and I don't speak creature, so I had no clue what it was trying to tell me. Hell, I could barely see what it was standing near. The air was so thick. And then I did see something. A boot. Jim. It had to be Jim. I couldn't leave him. But the thing was there. I don't know how to explain what happened next. One minute, I'm staring at this thing. The next minute, it's using those crazy wings, and it's gone. just gone. I hustled up to where it had been standing, and there was Jim, unconscious and bleeding from his scalp. I radioed the Jeep and told the ranger what I found, but not what I'd seen, and by the time I'd checked Jim for broken bones, our ride was there. We drove fast back to the station. Every breath tasted like ashes and dirt, and I didn't breathe easy until I was inside the station and away from those red eyes. I quit the next day. No 2 weeks and I'll think about it. Just quit. I wasn't ever going back there. My career did a complete 180. I took programming courses and now I have an office job in Sacramento, miles and miles away from Castle Crag State Park and whatever the hell I saw that day. My advice is please stay away from there. There's no guarantee that thing isn't gone. I honestly never thought I'd be writing in to say I had a crazy supernatural story, but here it goes. I am not the kind of person this happens to. I don't go poking around in graveyards. I don't keep an eye out for aliens. I don't even go to haunted houses on Halloween. If you Google the word skeptic, I'm pretty sure my picture shows up in the definition. Or it did. Maybe now I'm not so sure. In my day-to-day life, I'm a certified public accountant. It's a stressful job with a lot of time spent hunched over a desk or staring at a screen, so I usually try to go for long walks or hikes to get the kinks out. I live in Phoenix, so it's easy to get out of the metro area and into the wilderness. This particular day, late spring last year, I was giving myself the treat of a day hike in Tonto Natural Bridge State Park. We'd just gotten through April, and I was completely ridiculously stressed out. It was one of those beautiful clear days when you just need to be outside. Well, if you're me, anyway. The sun was hot and bright, and the landscape looked like someone had put it through an Instagram filter. Really pretty. I'd started early in the day because I wanted to do the Gowan Trail hike all in one shot, and I stopped for a lunch break before noon. I just finished and decided to check the map to make sure I was still going on the right trail up the mountain. It's a rough hike. I'd been meaning to try and get to this particular hike for a few months, but hadn't ever been able to get the time. Probably wasn't a good time to do it because it was hot, but hey, I like a challenge. If I didn't, I'd never get through tax season. I headed out at an easy pace once I'd given myself a bit of a rest. I don't like hiking just after I eat. The scenery is worth walking slow too. It's like something out of a dream, with huge caves to walk through, crumbling red cliffs and pristine streams. It's easy to see why this is one of the best state parks in the state. Like I said, the hike isn't easy and sometimes it's slow going. The day I went, I didn't see a lot of people. I liked that, to be honest. I liked the idea that I had this park to myself. The workout and the solitude did what I hoped it would do, and I started to feel like I was finally decompressing after the horrors of tax season. I was taking another water break when I heard a bit of noise ahead of me. I thought, damn, I hope it's not a bunch of tourists. I know that's not very polite, but I really wasn't in the mood for company. I wanted to be alone and be able to enjoy how beautiful it was. I heard some scuffling and rustling about 30 feet ahead of me and froze. It occurred to me that tourists might not be the problem. It was summer, but that didn't mean some cougar or fox wasn't about to try to take my leg off for getting near a den or a set of wandering cubs. It could even have been a rattler. I really didn't want to meet one of those. The rustling got worse, and then, all of a sudden, a bundle of gray fur tumbled onto the trail ahead of me. I stood where I was, my mouth going as dry as the dust caking my hiking boots, and did my best not to breathe. Whatever it was, the gray-furred critter made a snarling little whine and dashed back into the bushes. I stayed still for at least 10 minutes, but I didn't see or hear anything anymore. So was it safe to keep going, or should I go back? Maybe I should report the sighting, but I wasn't even sure what I saw, so I decided to wait and see if I could spot any clear tracks in the trail. If I took a picture of the tracks, the rangers would have an easier time identifying the animal. That seemed like a nice, neat idea, very practical, and that's what I went with. I was probably being stupid, if I'm honest, but I had my bear spray with me and my walking stick, and frankly, I'm a big guy. I figured it was a badger or a fox, and it wasn't going to be a problem if I kept going. I kept my eyes open as I kept going up the trail, but I didn't see or hear anything. My gamble was paying off. I'm not usually reckless, so this little bit of it felt pretty good. I was heading into the really rough part of the climb to the summit of the mountain when I heard clattering rocks. That's nothing new, it's a cliff face and rocks fall all the time. But because of what I'd seen before, I made sure to stop and take a look ahead to make sure the trail wasn't being blocked. The trail wasn't. But there was something on the mountain. No, two somethings. The animals had grayish fur. I couldn't tell how big they were at that distance, but I was estimating they were at least human-sized. Maybe. Like I said, it was hard to tell, but the fact that I could see some details, even at this distance, meant they weren't small. I froze and just watched them. They looked like they were communicating with each other, nosing at each other. Maybe they were hunting something, but maybe not. I didn't feel like there was a lot of urgency in what they were doing. The sensible part of me wanted to start backing up, but since the two critters and I assumed they were wolves, it didn't seem to be paying attention to anything but each other. I stayed where I was. One of the wolves, I'm just going to call them wolves, pushed at the other and then took off up the trail at full tilt. The other one yelped and started running after him. I'm guessing it was a him too. It reminded me of my dogs playing more than anything else. Maybe they were young wolves. That was it. They almost reminded me of teenagers daring each other to do something stupid. Whatever else they were competitive. They were running almost neck and neck up the slope, which was fine, I guess, as long as there was one. But that climb to the top turned into an actual, honest-to-goodness climb up a vertical cliff face, and last I checked, wolves weren't mountain goats. I pulled out my phone and tried to film it because, if nothing else, the rangers would find the behavior interesting. And that is where it got weird again. Zooming in meant I got to see the animals better. They weren't wolves. Well, not all the way wolves. Their heads were wolf-like, maybe dog-like. There was all that gray fur and a lot more of it starting to come in around their shoulders. But those were human-like legs pushing them up the mountain and five-fingered hands pulling them up the rocks. Clawed five-fingered hands. I felt like my heart was in my throat. I could feel the blood pounding, but I couldn't move. It was just so surreal. But then my logic came back. There had to be an explanation. Was I watching a movie scene? Was someone filming here? Was some angry assistant producer going to pop out of the bushes and scream at me for ruining their location shoot? That had to be it, right? But nobody else was around and I couldn't see any cameras. I watched through my phone camera as the thing in the lead missed its footing and slipped. It started to take a tumble down the mountain. The other one stopped climbing and tried to stop the lead one from falling. But like I said, whatever they weren't mountain goats. The lead one ended up on top of the smaller one and they went skidding down the cliff face. I couldn't see where they landed, or if they landed in one piece. I put my phone down and I actually started to scramble to where I thought they might have landed, because if I was right and there was a film crew, I wanted to make sure everything was okay. The last thing I wanted to do was report to the rangers that there was an accident on set. But then rationality kicked in, and I made myself take a look around. I didn't see or hear a film crew, nothing but nature as far as the eye could see. If there was a pair of wounded animals out there, I wasn't qualified to help. If there was a pair of wounded, I don't know what to call them. Things? Creatures? Cryptids? Out there, I didn't want to help. What I wanted was to go home, in one piece. Getting back to the park entrance and the ranger station took an hour, and I argued with myself the whole time. Turn in my phone footage? Forget it ever happened? I mean, what had I really seen? And would telling the truth be way more trouble than forgetting about it? In the end, I erased my video, and I didn't tell anyone. It just seemed like the safest option. So, like I said, I don't have an explanation for what I saw. At least, no rational explanation that makes sense. I just know I'm going to think twice about going back to the Tonto Natural Bridge Park, just in case whatever I saw that day remembers seeing me. My sighting happened back in the summertime of 2013. My uncle and I were up fishing on a river near Montapaka in Quebec. We parked our truck at the end of a road, went down into the woods, and hiked upstream for about 1 mile or so. It was around 1 p.m. in the afternoon. We had just caught some walleye, so we stopped to have lunch under a big willow that hung out over the river. It was very relaxing, and we were enjoying the warmth of the sun. The willow tree provided a nice little bit of shade, so we set up our chairs under it and ate our sandwiches. We were filthy and dirty from fishing. I had just taken a bite when I looked up and saw this thing standing on 2 legs roughly 40 feet away from us. It was moving in a really weird way, which I can only describe as being like a bear looks when it walks upright, but not quite as jerky. It wasn't looking at me or anything, but its eyes seemed to be focused behind me. I assumed that whatever it was after was running off in our direction, but now had disappeared into the woods. The thing seemed to be on a mission, at least that's how I understood it, and at this point I actually did just think it was a bear, and was happy that it was now gone. After eating, I walked upstream in the direction it disappeared, when I heard something large charging through the woods coming towards me very fast from downstream. The first thing that ran through my mind was it's either a large buck or a bear, so I stood frozen, thinking, crap, this is not going to be good. Fortunately, it just came right past me and my uncle, who had also come to the river to wash his hands. I could now see it clearly. This huge wolf biped came rushing at us, but then passed right by us. It was full-on chasing this huge game that was going by. A large elk. Actually, there were 2 elk, 1 large bull, and a smaller cow. The wolf creature gave pursuit to the larger one. My uncle stood there stiff as a board, and you could hear him breathing behind me. He was completely terrified. Okay, I was too. The elk, both of them, ran into the trees right by where we had parked and eaten. Then this wolf went past us too, and over to that same spot in a rush after them. It disappeared into the woods about 100 or so feet from us, but it didn't stop. You could still hear it running, giving chase, while also snorting loudly as it continued off in the woods. I don't think it saw us crouched down beneath the willow tree originally. Then everything got silent again, and that was the tip-off. That's when we knew we weren't alone. There was another one of these things watching us, a much bigger one, the alpha male. I could hear it breathing heavily, and there was a large cluster of fallen trees right beside us, so I crouched down between some dead wood, and I could see where it was. It was staring at us with its head slightly cocked to one side. It stayed perfectly still. It looked unlike the other one that was shaggier and wolf-like. This one was completely black and much more muscularly built. It made this very odd sound that reminded me of cattle, but on a much deeper scale. My uncle saw it next and he screamed out to me, "We have to go now." Now that caught my attention because my uncle is usually very calm. So we just threw our stuff in and jumped into his truck, pretty much leaving behind our fishing gear. I knew what this thing was, but I just couldn't figure out why it would be here, in this place. There were 3 more of them already emerging from the trees near where they ran after the 2 elk. I didn't want to think about what else was out here. We got in the truck and drove off back down the road until we came to the paved state road, which would lead us back to town. The city is about 60 miles east from where we went fishing and straight south. When we returned home, I explained to my mother what had happened, as well as some family friends who were interested in hearing about it. They had also apparently heard rumors of a bizarre bipedal wolf living up around that mountain. To this day, I don't exactly have a clue as to what on earth we encountered, even though I had a faint idea, or at least I thought I did. But whatever these animals are, they did not like that we invaded their hunting territory. I should start by saying that I'm not typically prone to believing in stories of strange creatures. I mean, I've always been a serious person with a serious job. I'm a chief warrant officer and I've been in the Navy for 25 years. And I've spent plenty of time out in the wild. I started hunting with my dad when I was 12 years old. I've never been one to scare easily. I've been in combat and had to deal with all kinds of dicey situations. Anyway, me and my buddy Bill like to go hunting wild pigs on my cousin's farm down in Florida. It's a little south of Jacksonville. I would never go alone. It was a two-person job. One person would man the spotlight and the other would have the rifle. We'd roam through the cornfields until we heard animals rustling around. Then we'd hit them with the spotlight and take our shots. This time I'm talking about, we went out on a night in January. It was pretty cold, probably down in the 40s. We drove out, and then we walked out to a field where we'd known the pigs to hang out. We settled in there to listen. There was no moon, and it was cloudy, so it was just about as dark as you can get. It was just the right conditions to get some pigs. It wasn't too long before we started hearing some rustling and grunting. Bill hit the spotlight, and we saw 5 or 6 pretty big pigs. I had my lever-action rifle ready, and I fired at the biggest pig and downed him with a shot behind the ear. The pigs panicked, and I got off about 3 more shots, but they went kind of high, and the pigs made it to the tree line. My ears were ringing, and my adrenaline was pumping. I was really wishing I had gotten more than one. We started walking toward the one on the ground, but as soon as I took a step toward it, we heard a scream. It was a loud, angry scream. It sounded like it was close. I was like, "What the hell was that?" Bill looked at me all freaked out. He shone the light around and scanned the open field and the trees at the edge. We couldn't see anything. He started to say something, but we heard the scream again. It seemed closer and louder. It was really loud, but really raspy. Like if you went to a football game and screamed and hollered and wound up losing half your voice. And the next day you tried to scream as loud as you could for 10 seconds. That's what it sounded like. Bill said, "Give me your pistol, we need to get out of here." I had a pistol on me along with the rifle. I handed him my .45, but I said, "What about the pig?" He said, "Screw the pig." We were about a mile away from the truck on a 1,000-acre farm, with some kind of demon thing screaming at us in the pitch black. We started to feel panicky. We found the track we had followed in and started to walk away fast, but we kept turning back to scan the area thinking we were about to see something come after us. Then we heard it again and turned around and saw this thing on the path about 50 feet away. This creature was about 4 feet tall and was staring at us with red eyes. It had spikes down its back with leathery gray skin. It looked hairless to me. It gave us this weird grin, and I swear it looked like it only had like 3 long teeth in the front of its mouth. The hind legs looked huge. It was like we were paralyzed trying to figure out what the hell we were looking at. Then Bill remembered he had the pistol and raised it, and the thing took off into the corn. We finally came to our senses and started running full speed toward the truck. I don't remember if there were any more screams. My adrenaline was way up, and all my focus was on running as fast as I could without tripping and falling. We made it back to the truck and hightailed it back to my cousin's house. On the ride home, we were trying to calm ourselves down. But Bill just kept saying, "What the actual hell was that? No freaking way that was a hog." And all I could say was, "It sure as heck wasn't." We got back to my cousin's house where they had made a bonfire and were standing around it. We must have still looked pretty wild-eyed because my cousin came over and handed us 2 beers right away and was like, "Rough night? Did you get a pig?" "Yeah, we left the pig out there. Maybe we'll get it in the morning." He looked pretty confused, and then we both just started telling him about the crazy screaming, and he said, "Yeah, raccoons can make some really wild noises." Then we told him what we saw, and he seemed to get a little pale. And he started telling us about this weird thing that had happened with his neighbor's sheep the week before. He said almost 10 sheep had been found slaughtered, and they were completely drained of blood with strange puncture marks on their chests. And we could tell he felt weird about saying this, but then he said the neighbor thought a chupacabra had gotten them. I'd heard that word before, but I thought it was just some weird legend from South America or something. And that was that. We got the pig the next day. We felt okay going out there in the daylight, but honestly, I don't know if I'd want to be out there in the dark ever again. I live in a small town in Montana, right up against the Rocky Mountains. It's the kind of place where the wilderness is just a step away, and folks still hold tight to the old ways. I'm a forest ranger, been doing it for close to 15 years now. I know these woods like the back of my hand. But something happened about a month ago that's got me questioning everything I thought I knew about this place. It was late afternoon and I was out on patrol in the truck. The sun was setting behind the mountains, casting that golden light that makes everything look like a postcard. I was driving down an old logging road that hasn't been used in years. It's pretty overgrown, but I like to check it now and then for any signs of poachers. As I'm driving, I notice something strange up ahead. There's this tree, a big old pine, and it's shaking like crazy. I mean, really shaking, like there's something big in the branches. But there's no wind, nothing that could be causing it. I stop the truck and get out to take a closer look. That's when I hear this sound, like a low growl. It's coming from the tree. I'm thinking maybe it's a mountain lion or a bear, so I grab my rifle just in case. As I get closer, the growling gets louder, and I can feel it in my chest. The tree is still shaking, and I can see the branches moving. Then, all of a sudden, this thing drops out of the tree onto the ground. I can't even begin to describe what I saw. It was big, maybe 8 or 9 feet tall, and covered in this dark, shaggy fur. But it wasn't a bear. Its arms were too long, and it had these hands with long fingers and claws. Its face was almost human, but the eyes were too big, and the nose was all wrong. It looked at me, and I swear it felt like it was looking into my soul. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. We just stood there staring at each other for what felt like an eternity. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it turned and ran off into the trees. It moved so fast, like nothing I've ever seen. 1 second it was there, and the next it was gone. I stood there for a long time, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. I didn't feel scared exactly. More like, I don't know. Like I'd seen something I wasn't supposed to. I didn't say anything to the other rangers. I know what they'd think. But I did some asking around town real quiet-like. An old-timer named Earl, who's lived in these parts longer than anyone, told me his granddad used to talk about the Old Ones, beings that lived in the mountains long before people came here. He said they were guardians of the forest and that they could see into a man's heart. I don't know what to believe, but I can't just pretend like it didn't happen. I still go out on patrol, still drive down that old logging road. But it's different now. The forest doesn't feel the same, like I'm not alone out there. Anyway, I wanted to share this with you and whoever else might be listening. Maybe someone else has seen something like this. Maybe there's someone out there who understands what it was. I don't have any grand conclusions or anything. I'm just a guy who saw something he can't explain, but I guess that's how it goes sometimes. The world's a big place and there's a lot in it that doesn't make sense. And maybe that's okay. Maybe not everything needs an explanation. Maybe some things are just meant to be mysteries.